Hello everyone and welcome back to the third tutorial of this video series. And in this tutorial we're going to be looking at how to set up your database connection to your website. And so the first thing you have to do is to go to your client zone and then open a new hosting tab. And then go to your hosting package. Click on Website Manager. Log into Website Manager and this will take you to the control panel. Once you have gained access to your control panel, there are then three ways that we can interact with our database. And the first way of interacting with it is to use the PHP MyAdmin console. The other way is to set up a new database and manage your databases. And the last is the database wizard. Okay, and so on the Afrihost shared Linux hosting servers, the only available database management system is the MySQL databases, but that's okay. We will talk about other database management systems in a while. Okay, so I've just opened the PHP MyAdmin tab, and as you can see, I don't have anything inside of my PHP MyAdmin as a database. I only have this information schema, which is something that I advise you not to fiddle around with too much, or at all, in fact. However, we are going to be setting up a new database, so for that I will open a new tab to the database wizard. And then this will prompt me to create a new database, and in this case I'm just going to call it MyDB. Okay, and so I should remember this name. It comes prepended with your Afrihost username and then an underscore, and so this will be your full database name. Just going to click on next step. And then it'll also prompt us to create a database user, and I'm just going to call it user. So once again, it comes prepended with your Afrihost username, an underscore, and then the name that you would like to use for connecting to a database. And once again, you should consider that to be your full username that we're going to be using throughout the rest of the tutorial. You should then set also a password. Okay, so I've just created a new user. However, we should still set the privileges. So in our case, we have been directed to the database management console, and where I can then select all privileges, because I want to be able to allow this user to manage everything within the database using my PHP commands inside of my website. So I'm just going to tick this box that says allow all privileges and then make changes. So if yours did not do that correctly, we can also set that database privileges by going to managing MySQL databases. So we can actually just change some of the features here for our user and our database. Okay, so I'm not going to go into much detail about that. So now that I've closed those tabs and I reload the PHP MyAdmin console, you will see a new database appear, which has your Afrihost username, underscore, and then your database name. So that's your full database name. Inside of it, we don't even have anything yet, so I'm just going to click on SQL, and then I'm just going to say create table, and I'm going to call this table users. So I want to build a login system for my users. So the table that we will create will be considered your first SQL query, and we're doing this within the PHP MyAdmin system, and the table that we will create will be used to manage our users, and so this will be your first SQL code.
SQL is an acronym for Structured Query Language. It is often used in web developing for designing and managing data held in a relational database management system such as MySQL.
Okay, so as a web developer, the most important operations that we need to know for managing databases are the CRUD operations: create, read, update, and delete. But we will discuss them as we go along with this tutorial. So for now, let us just continue building a table. I'm creating a table which has 6 columns, which is called users ID. I'm also creating another column, users underscore UID, which is the username. And then we have a user's password, PWD, users underscore email, users underscore name, and users account activated. Then I also need to specify the data types for each column that I would like to store the data as. So the first column will store integers, and it will be auto incremented, auto underscore increment. It will be the primary key, and it will be not null. We also then have a user's UID column, which stores tiny text, okay, and that's also set to not null. We then have password, which is a long text, which is also set to not null. Then we have email, which is tiny text, that's also set to not null. We have the user's name, tiny text, which is not null, and then the last one also has the additional parameter of default 0, which just means that if the account is not activated, then the user will not be able to access the website depending on this value that is set to that column. And once the user will be activated, we will set that value to 1. Okay, so when I run this query, by clicking on this go button, and then I see this green success message over here. Okay, and so now I have a new table which I can access from anywhere inside my website. So I have my columns, and I can go create new users. I can actually create them from within the PHPMyAdmin console, but I'm just going to avoid doing that and just show you how I would go about coding a new connection to my database from scratch. So now that I'm back in my cPanel, I can go to my file manager, where I will then write a piece of code inside of my web server to access the database. So as discussed in the first and second tutorial, your website files should be located under the public_HTML directory. And so I'm just going to access that directory by double clicking. And then I've cleared out my directory, my website folder from the second tutorial, where I was just illustrating to you how to actually get your website files online. And I just wanted to keep things simple, so I only kept the index.php file. And so I'm going to show you what is inside of it. And if I edit that, I'm just going to see that I've PHP tags over here, and then I'm just going to print to the screen echo hello world in inverted commas. And so this is what you see rendering here in my browser. Okay, and so I'm going to replace that with some of the new code that we're going to be writing. And so before we get to do that, I just want to make sure that you understand that we're going to need 4 pieces of information. And the first is obviously your username and your database name. Then we need the user password for the database user, as well as the server name. And so it's quite easy to get your server name. If in case you haven't followed along in the first tutorials, there's another way of doing that. That's just looking at the URL, and everything you see after HTTPS up to .co.za, including a serve. So that part of your URL is actually your server name. That is where your database as well as your website server is located. Okay, mine says .aserve.co.za. I'm just going to keep that string in mind for later. Okay.
Take note of the server name on this certificate, which also appears in the URL of your browser while you are logged into your cPanel as website administrator. These sensitive Afrihost business profile credentials will be needed when configuring the database connection for your website.
Another thing that I would like to mention before we really get started with some of the code is that there are different ways of connecting to a MySQL database using PHP. However, Afrihost servers are running on PHP 7. Since PHP 5 and later, the 2 methods that are available to us to connect to the database is what is called MySQLi, and the I stands for improved, since MySQL method has been deprecated since it was unsecure and has compromised many websites. However, MySQLi is much better, and some of the features have been updated, etc. And the other method that we use will be known as PDO, PHP Data Object. And so these are the 2 methods that we're going to be looking at when trying to connect to a database. The difference is difficult to explain if you haven't had an introduction to object-oriented coding yet. So I'm going to try and keep things simple, and we're first going to be looking at MySQLi. Okay, and so over here you can see there's some code which I might be able to copy and paste, or at least in some sense recycle, and then just obviously change some of the important variables over here, and then hopefully that will work. So that's what I'm going to try and do. So I'm here on W3 Schools, and I think that's a good place to start for everyone. However, as I said, I'm not going to follow exactly the same methods over here. I'm just going to put some of my own things in there, and it should probably do the job just fine. Okay, so to connect to my database, I've just opened up the index.php file in which I find this code, which I will replace with the code snippet. And so in here I have 4 variables. That's $db server name, $db username, $db password, and $db name, which I set equals to these string values. And these are our server names, username, password, and database name, which we've obtained from our Afrihost business profile as discussed in the previous sections. Okay, and then I also have this new connection string $CONN, which is equals to the MySQL_connect method. And in the parentheses, I pass in those variables in that order as placed above. So that's $db server name, $db username, $password, $db name. And then I check if the connection was refused by prepending the connection variable with a exclamation mark, which will return false if the connection was refused. And then by negating that, it will just return true. So it'll check if that condition is true. If the connection was refused, it'll just tell us that the connection failed, and it will append the MySQL_connect I_error parentheses method, and it will just show us all the mistakes that we've made. Otherwise, it'll just echo to the screen that we have connection established. Okay, so if I save that file and I reload my browser, it'll say connection established. Okay, so now we have a connection to the database. But how do we actually put new values into our database? And for that, before I establish the connection, I want to declare some SQL query in string format, which will be run inside of the SQL database. And so for that, I have declared the variable $SQL, which is set equals to the string over here, which reads insert into users to insert something into the table called users. And then within this first set of parentheses, I specify the table column headings, so that I'm going to insert into users underscore UID. Then I'm going to insert a value into users underscore password. And then I'm going to set a value into users underscore email, as well as users underscore name. And I don't need to worry about inserting anything into the user ID, because that one is auto incremented. And I also don't need to worry about setting anything into the account activated column, because that one is also set by default to 0. Okay, and the second set of parentheses, I pass in the actual values that I would like to insert into the tables columns. And the first one is the username, which is John underscore Doe. The second is the password, which is 123ABC. The third is john@example.com. That's his email address. And the last one is just his name, John. Okay, and so if I want to execute that and run that into my database, I have to point to the query method and pass in the SQL variable. Okay, and so what's going to happen is it's going to check that connection and the query was successfully executed. Otherwise, it's just going to give us an error. And then upon running that, once it's successful, I want to point to the close method. Okay, so upon saving that, reloading my browser, it'll just say connection established. We haven't actually changed the string echo over here. But if I go to my PHP admin console, and I access the users table, there should be a new user inside of my table, which it is, because it says users underscore ID 1, users UID John Doe, users password 123ABC, users email, users name, and users account activated is set equals to 0. Alright, so I might keep that open for the remainder of this tutorial, and I might toggle between these tabs just to be able to see what's happening. So that's pretty cool, but the problem with this is that these values that were passed into the table are static. The same values are being added into the table. So it's always going to be John Doe and his credentials. So I'm going to run it again and again. And I want to reload the browser to see, okay, it's always the same values. And so we actually want to be able to grab variables from our user upon inputting it into our HTML text boxes. So when we build a website, we have those text boxes into which our user inserts their credentials and their username and stuff. And then that is processed into the database instead. So for this section, I'm just going to add error reporting. I want to set any underscore set in between the parentheses to display underscore errors, and that should be equals to 1. And then the same for display underscore startup underscore errors, set that to 1. And then error reporting to e underscore all, so that if I make a mistake, for example by removing the database name my underscore d and saving that, it will then tell me that the connection was denied. Okay, so I've just reverted that back to my DB. Okay, and so yeah, as I said, we now want to be able to pass in variables into the values parentheses instead. So instead of having John Doe in inverted commas or in quotation marks, I want to have $ users underscore name set as a variable users underscore name above it, and that should be equals to the string value John underscore Doe, as we had it before, except this time it's passed in as a variable to the values. Okay, but this will not work because unfortunately there is this serious threat of what is called SQL injection. Okay, and we have to avoid that by using the technique of prepared statements. And so I'm going to illustrate to you how to do that. But for now, I just want to fill in the variable names. So that's going to be users underscore password. And then the next is going to be users underscore email. And then the last one is going to be users underscore name. And so these are our variables that we want to pass in. Users password, users email, and user's name, which were set equals to John Doe 123ABC. The email, so john@example.com, and then the name was just John. Okay, so we will need to use prepared statements because, so let me illustrate to you what I mean. If I save that, currently I have 2 people inside of my users table in the MySQL database, which is John and Mary with index 10 and 12. And if I reload my browser, you would expect there to be 3 users, but upon reloading my database, I still see that nothing has happened. That's because the database is preventing us from inserting values that are variable values into our database, because we need to use the prepared statement method. So to make sure that it cleans the data and make sure that no data has been injected into our database that might be able to corrupt our data. And so to do that, we're going to take our query, and instead of passing in the variables, we're only going to pass in question marks, which resemble undefined values at this point. And then the variable names will be binded to the statement in just a bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to declare a statement variable, which we will set equals to MySQL I_statement init, and then we're going to pass in the connection variable, close off that line with a semicolon, and then inside of the if statement, I'm no longer going to check for connection because I know that the connection is fine. This is not really best practice or standard procedures that you should be doing. I'm just illustrating how you can insert values to your database. And what we're going to do here is we're going to check that if the statement was not executed, MySQL I_statement_prepare. I'm going to give it the statement variable that we've just created, and then I'm going to pass in the SQL string. So it's going to run that on the database to check if the statement is not corrupt or referring to any variables that might damage our database. And then if it is, it's just going to print statement error. I'm just going to remove the rest of the lines there. Okay, so we're just checking that the prepare statement is actually correctly formatted. And then what we're going to do in the else block is that we're going to say we want to run the MySQL I_statement_bind_param method and pass into that this statement that we've created together with the specifications that we want to pass in for string. So that's 4 S's. And then we want to give it the data values, which is our variables over here, and pass that in. Okay, so I want to bind the parameters using that MySQL I_statement_bind_params method, and then I want to execute that by calling the MySQL I_statement_execute method and pass in the statement variable. Okay, and just be sure to close off your lines of code with semicolon. And before we finalize, we want to also just close off our statement variable. So we're going to say MySQL I_stmt statement_close, and then pass in the statement variable. Okay, so this is a nice way of doing it. It's a procedural way of doing it. So if I save that and reload my browser, it should say connection established because we haven't really changed that. And reloading my database, I should see a third line, John_Doe 123ABC, john@example.com. Okay, and so that completely worked as expected. So the advantage of using this prepared statement method is that our database is always safe, and we're always passing in variables that were obtained from the user's input via the HTML text boxes. So for example, when the user tries to log in, he will insert new values here, like for example, Bob_Dylan. And then he would have a password of #%123ABC, and that's going to be bob@example.com. And his name is just Bob. If I save that, since this is a variables, it's not really the HTML text boxes, but the idea is that these variables are then grabbed from the user who inserted those values into the text boxes. Upon reloading my browser, it should say connection established. And upon reloading the database, I should see Bob_Dylan with its password and the username, the email and the username. So we'll talk about the passwords later because this is quite unsafe, not the way that you would like to store your passwords in your database, because this can be compromised and then anyone can access anyone else's information, etc. So we'll talk about that later. For now, we're just dealing with the database stuff. Okay, and so the next thing that you would like to be able to do is to be able to retrieve data from the database. And that's quite similar to inserting data in the database. Well, it depends on your use case, but the most likely difference is, in general, it's just a matter of changing the SQL query from insert to select. In this case, I might want to select everything, so I'm going to use the wildcard star, select everything from users, that's the table from which we want to select our information, and then I'm going to use the keyword where, and instead of having a parentheses here for values, I want to specify a specific column. So I'm going to say where users UID, and then that set equals to, and then I'm going to give it a delimiter question mark, which refers to a undetermined or unspecified value. And still within the statement, my SQL statement in it, I'm still going to pass the connection variable. I'm still going to check if this prepare statement will run on the SQL database. Otherwise, it will still print a statement error. And then instead of binding all the parameters, I only need to specify that specific string for the user's UID. So I'm going to remove all that, and everything else is pretty much okay over here. But now I want to fetch that data in an appropriate format. So now I want to retrieve that data and display it on my screen. And to do that, I'm just going to create this new variable $result data, which I set equals to MySQLi underscore statement underscore get underscore result method. And I pass in this variable statement over here. Okay, so then I want to create this new variable row, which takes this result data and converts that to an associative array. So I'm calling the MySQLi underscore fetch underscore assoc, and then in parentheses I pass that result data from our statement, and then I want to dump that on my screen. So I'm going to use var underscore dump and then passing the variable $row. Okay, and upon saving that and reloading my browser, I should see, okay, I get this array of 6 elements, and they are associated with the key users underscore ID, users underscore UID. Those are the table headings in our database. We have this name, we have then this key as well, users underscore PWD, password, users underscore email with the email address, and everything is provided. We are told that these are strings, that's an integer, etc. So cool, that's how we can retrieve data, and then we can obviously then refer to row by key. And if I want to refer to the users underscore UID to retrieve the name, as I've done over here, I've just referred to that variable $row, passed in the key users underscore UID, and then I want to actually set that to name. Okay, so I want to echo the name, but I also want to echo maybe a couple of lines just so that you can see the name appear once I save and reload the browser. So you get Bob Dylan. Okay, so you should probably also just move one down before the connection established line. I might as well just delete or remove that line, but for now let's just keep that. Okay, so I get Bob underscore Dylan. Okay, and that's me printing the name from this associative array. Cool. So we can now insert and retrieve data. We just need to be able to update and delete data. So let's look at updating data, because this is quite similar to what we've just done. We're still using the prepared statement method within SQL. To update a row in your SQL table is actually a matter of changing the SQL query. Instead of select, we will have an update statement. We will update the table users, and we will set the name update users, and then the keyword set users underscore name, and then we would like to use a prepared statement again. So I'm going to refer to this undeclared variable update users set users name equals 2, and what we would like to do is then to maintain the same code, but instead this time I'm just going to pass in the variable users underscore name, and the rest of the things will remain the same, except we wouldn't need to go and fetch anything, because the SQL statement that will be run on the database will not actually return anything. It will only return true if the statement was executed. And I'm not going to print that to the screen, so I'm going to remove all this. I'm going to change the echo, the connection established string to query successful. Okay, I'm going to save that, and once I reload my browser, it says query successful, and then we should go and check. What we've just done is we've just set all the names equals to Bob. Alright, so yeah, you can go and play around with different things and decide what you would like to update. But we've just updated all the users. So it says update users, set users underscore name equals 2. And then we passed in the variable users underscore name. So it set all the names to Bob. Okay, so that might be something that you don't want to do. It depends on your use case, as I've explained before. We could also have specified using the keyword where, and then pass in a second undefined parameter here, delimiter, where users underscore email, and then set that equals 2. Okay, and then still keep the same statement, but we're also going to pass in another string over here with the bind method, and then another variable, in this case users underscore email. But I want to change his name to Rob instead. If I save this in this table where it says bob@example.com, that name will become Rob. So let's refresh the browser. It says query successful. Let me refresh the database, and now it says Rob. So you see the difference that the keyword where makes. You know, it'll specify that I don't necessarily want to update all of these values, but specifically that one. So yeah, we can create, read, and update data. So to delete data is quite easy as well. That just depends on your use case as well, but it's also a matter of the SQL code rather than the Python, rather than PHP code. Because all you have to do here is to say delete from, and then specify the table, and then I'm going to say where user's name, and I'm going to only pass in that username again. So user's name, that's one string, and then I'm going to give it the user's name, which in this case is still Rob, so I'm just going to leave it at Rob over here. But if I passed in Bob, it will delete all the 3 lines above it. So for now, let's just save the changes and see that when I refresh the browser, it says statement error. Okay, so we have a problem over here. Delete everything from users, where users underscore name equal, and then we bind that statement and we pass in this variable. Okay, so the problem is that we shouldn't actually specify star. We should just say delete from users, because it knows delete means to delete the entire row. So let's just try that again. Running this, it says query successful, and then refreshing the browser, it has deleted the person with name Rob. Okay, so if I go and change this to Bob, save the changes, reload the browser, it still says query successful. Reloading that. So I'm just going to drop database table anyway. Let me actually show you how to do that. We can say drop table users.
Drop that kitty down low. Pop that kitty down low. Shot that like a window. I'm gonna make you explode.
So since I now have nothing in it, and we're pretty much done with this tutorial, I'm just going to go run that statement, and it will completely erase that table. I no longer have that table anymore. Okay, cool. So that concludes it for this tutorial. In the next tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make your code a lot more secure, because at this point, all of our database credentials are inside of a PHP file, which is accessible, especially people that really know how to use the internet and stuff like that. It's really easy to hack into your database if you leave your code exposed in this way. So I'm going to talk about environment variables, putting your sensitive credentials inside of an environment file, and then obviously also show you how to get that library set up onto your server, because that's quite a process, and you need to use the Composer PHP package manager to do important work on our server that will help you to set up your environment correctly so that your database credentials is not exposed. Okay, and so I hope to see you in the next one.